I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning white as I navigated the winding highway that stretched before me. The setting sun casted a golden glow over the snow-covered mountains of Aspen, Colorado, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. But the beauty of the scene was lost on me. My heart pounded in my chest, and my temples throbbed as I focused on the voice coming through the phone's speaker. "Why can't you just listen for once?" Kelly's voice was sharp, her words slicing through me like a knife. I could hear the frustration simmering beneath the surface, threatening to boil over. I tried to shallow the lump in my throat, but it stubbornly remained. "I am listening, Kelly," I snapped, my own anger flaring in response. "But you're not making any sense." The line went silent for a moment, and I could practically feel the tension building between us. Our arguments had become increasingly frequent lately, the emotional strain driving a wedge deeper and deeper into our once happy relationship. "You never take me seriously," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the car's engine. I could hear the hurt in her words, and it stung more than any of her previous accusations. "We're going in circles here," I said, my voice strained. "Maybe we should just talk about this later." "No," she said firmly, her tone resolute. "We need to settle this now." I sighed, feeling the weight of our unresolved issues pressing down on me. But the more we talked, the more I realized that we weren't getting anywhere. The conversation was a tangled mess, both of us snapping at each other, barely listening to what the other had to say. Finally, my patience reached a breaking point. In a split-second decision, I ended the call, cutting off Kelly's voice and leaving me with nothing but the hum of the engine and my own racing thoughts. The silence was deafening. Trying to shake off the lingering tension, I focused on the road ahead, the snow-capped peaks of the mountains looming ominously in the distance. I reached over and turned on the radio, hoping for a bit of distraction from the storm brewing inside of me.
"Attention all travelers in the Aspen area,"
the weather news reporter announced, her voice crackling through the car speakers.
"An extreme winter advisory is in effect. Heavy snowfall and dangerous conditions are expected. Please exercise caution while driving."
I glanced out the window, noticing the first few snowflakes beginning to fall from the darkening sky. As I watched them drift and dance in the wind, I couldn't help but think that they were a fitting metaphor for my relationship with Kelly, once beautiful and full of promise, but now caught in a downward spiral, threatened by the cold and darkness that settled between us. As the snowfall grew heavier, I turned up the heater, trying to ward off the chill that seemed to steep into my very bones. Little did I know that the warmth of the car and the soothing drone of the reporter's voice would be the first steps on a journey that would forever change my life. The snow continued to fall in thick, swirling flakes that obscured my vision and coated the windshield, creating a mesmerizing pattern of white. My eyes grew heavy, and I struggled to keep them open, the exhaustion from the argument and the hypnotic dance of the snowflakes taking their toll. In the haze of my last moments of consciousness, I could have sworn I heard Kelly's voice, soft and gentle, whispering my name. My eyelids fluttered closed, and I slipped into a restful sleep. The car continued to coast along the treacherous highway. I was jolted awake by a sudden, violent impact. My heart raced as I took in the scene before me. A large tree branch had crashed through the windshield, stopping just inches from my head. Shards of glass littered the dashboard and seats, sparkling like deadly ice crystals. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead, my breath coming in shallow, rapid gasps. "Kelly?" I called out instinctively, my voice shaking. I couldn't fathom how she could be here with me, but my heart ached with the need to know if she was safe. To my astonishment, she was sitting in the passenger seat, her eyes wide with shock. Her clothes were torn, and a thin line of blood trickled down from her forehead. But she was alive, Relief washed over me, followed closely by confusion. How had she gotten here? Are you okay? She asked, her voice trembling. I think so, I replied, my heart still hammering in my chest. What are you doing here? I don't know, she whispered, her brow furrowed. 1 minute we were arguing, and the next, I was here. As we sat there, trying to make sense of our situation, I became acutely aware of our isolation. The once busy highway was now empty, a barren, snow-covered expanse devoid of any signs of life. The storm had shallowed the world around us, leaving us trapped in a frozen wasteland. With no other option, we decided to wait out the night in the car, hoping that help would arrive in the morning. I rummaged through the back seat, finding an old blanket and some snacks we'd packed for our trip. We huddled together, sharing the meager provisions as we tried to stay warm. Throughout the night, we talked, the stress and anger from our argument melting away like snowflakes on a warm windshield. We shared stories from our past and laughed at our own foolishness. The love and affection we'd once shared slowly seeped back into our hearts. Hours ticked by, and the temperature continued to drop. I knew that the car battery wouldn't last forever, but I was reluctant to turn off the heater. The warmth it provided was our only protection against the deadly cold outside. But eventually, the inevitable happened. The battery died, leaving us shivering and desperate in the dark, our only hope of survival dwindling with every icy breath we took. As the first light of dawn struggled to break through the dense curtain of snow, I stared out the window at the desolate landscape, my breath fogging the glass. Kelly lay curled up beside me, her body trembling from the cold. I knew we couldn't stay in the car any longer. Our only chance of survival was to venture out into the storm and find help. I gently shook Kelly awake. Her eyes fluttered open as she met my gaze. We can't stay here, I told her, my voice thick with urgency. We need to try and find help. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes scanning the frozen wasteland outside the car. Are you sure? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. It's our only chance, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We can't just sit here and freeze to death. With a resigned nod, Kelly agreed, and we braced ourselves for the harsh reality of the world outside. Our shared body heat provided a small measure of comfort against the biting cold. Then, hand in hand, we stepped out into the storm. The snow was deep, reaching up to our knees and making each step a struggle. The wind howled around us, its icy grip stealing the breath from our lungs. Our progress was slow and painful, but we pushed on. Determination and desperation fueled our steps. For hours we trudged through the snow, our energy levels plummeting as the cold gnawed at our bones. I could see the exhaustion etched on Kelly's face, her cheeks flushed and her eyes glazed. I worried about her, but I knew that stopping now would mean certain death. We had no choice but to continue. At times, the snowfall became so heavy that we could barely see a few feet in front of us. The world seemed to disappear around us, leaving only the sensation of endless white and the sound of our ragged breaths. Yet somehow, despite the odds, we clung to each other and to the hope that we would find help before it was too late. As the day wore on, our once steady pace slowed to a crawl, our legs heavy and our bodies numb. The cold had seeped into our very cores, leaving us with a bone-deep weariness that threatened to overtake us. I could see the fear in Kelly's eyes, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was, that we might not make it out of this storm alive. But even in the face of such despair, we refused to give up. We kept moving forward, driven by the love we had rediscovered and the desperate need to survive. And as we struggled against the relentless forces of nature, we clung to the fragile hope that somewhere out in the frozen expanse, there was a beacon of light and warmth waiting to save us. Our strength was nearly spent when I stumbled, falling face first into the snow. As I struggled to lift my head, a flicker of light caught my eye. Squinting against the blinding whiteness, I could barely make out a silhouette of a cabin, its warm glow a stark contrast to the frigid world around us. A sudden surge of hope coursed through me, and I found the energy to push myself back onto my feet. "Kelly, look!" I shouted over the howling wind, pointing towards the cabin. Her eyes widened in surprise and relief, and we shared a moment of silent gratitude before forcing our weary bodies to move once more. The cabin seemed impossibly far away, but with each step, the promise of safety and warmth grew closer. As we approached the door, I noticed tendrils of smoke curling from the chimney, a sign that someone was inside. My heart raced, a mixture of fear and anticipation welling up inside me. With a trembling hand, I knocked on the door, the sound barely audible over the storm's fury. To my amazement, it swung open almost immediately, revealing an old man with a kind smile and twinkling eyes. Come in," he beckoned, his voice warm and inviting. "You must be freezing out there." Without a moment's hesitation, Kelly and I stepped inside, enveloped by the warmth and comfort of the cabin. The old man led us to a crackling fireplace, where we gratefully sank down onto the plush chairs before it. He disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with steaming mugs of hot cocoa. As we sipped the sweet, soothing drink, the old man introduced himself as Henry. He lived alone, he explained, but he always kept an eye out for travelers who might be caught in the storm. We thanked him profusely, our gratitude almost too much for words. As the night wore on, we shared stories and laughter, the warmth of the cabin and the company easing the pain of our ordeal. But as the fire began to dwindle, I noticed a subtle change in Henry's demeanor. His smile faded, and a dark cloud seemed to pass over his eyes. "You know," he said quietly, his voice tinged with sadness, "you're in a lot of trouble out here." My heart clenched with fear, and I could feel Kelly tense behind me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Henry looked at us with pity in his eyes. "This storm, it's not like any other. It takes more than it gives, and if you don't do something, you're not going to make it out of here alive." A chill ran down my spine, colder than any wind that had battered us outside. As I stared into the depths of the dying fire, I wondered what terrible fate awaited us, and whether we had the strength to face it. In the flickering firelight, I blinked, trying to comprehend Henry's ominous warning. The cabin, which had felt like a haven just moments before, now seemed to close in around us, oppressive and threatening. I looked to Kelly for reassurance, but her face was pale and fearful. "What do we need to do?" My voice barely audible over the crackling of the dying embers. Before Henry could respond, I felt a sudden, bone-chilling cold envelop me. My breath caught in my throat, and my heart raced with panic. The world seemed to spin, and my vision blurred. As the darkness closed in, when my eyes fluttered open, I found myself lying in the snow, the bitter cold seeping into my very core. The cabin, Henry, and the warmth of the fire were gone, as if they had never existed at all. I struggled to sit up, my limbs stiff and unresponsive. Panic surged through my body as I realized the full extent of my situation. I was completely and utterly alone, my body succumbing to the merciless cold. As my gaze darted frantically around, I spotted Kelly sitting nearby. She was watching me with an unreadable expression, seemingly unfazed by the cold. She wore only a t-shirt, and yet she showed no sign of discomfort. A shiver of unease ran down my spine, and I suddenly understood the truth. The Kelly I had been traveling with was not real. She was a fragment of my imagination, born from the stress and isolation of the storm. A profound sadness washed over me, followed by a crushing sense of hopelessness. I was alone, trapped in a frozen hellscape with no hope of rescue. Despair threatened to overwhelm me, and I felt my will to survive slipping away. As I lay there in the snow, my body slowly succumbing to the cold, I couldn't help but think of the real Kelly. She was miles away, safe and warm in our home, blissfully unaware of the terrible fate that had befallen me. And as the darkness closed in around me, I realized that I would never see her again. With my last fading breaths, I whispered a silent apology to the woman I loved. I had failed her, and now I would pay the ultimate price. Meanwhile, back at home, the real Kelly sat in our living room, wrapped in a warm blanket as she watched the news. Her heart ached in worry, our argument still fresh in our mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As the newscaster continued to report on the devastating winter storm, a breaking news segment caught her attention. A man had been found on the side of the road, having succumbed to the unforgiving cold. Kelly's breath caught in her throat as the reporter revealed the man's identity.
Police have identified the man as 29-year-old James Whitlock, pronounced dead at 9 a.m. on Thursday morning due to severe hypothermia as a result of the brutally cold weather. This storm is extremely dangerous, so we ask that you all travel with caution and please stay home if you can.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below. Until next time, stay spooked.